An hour is very long.
Ah,
Half an hour is very long,
okay,
Dr.
25 minutes or
Daniel.
20 minutes, up to you. Okay, then we'll
All
have a
right.
discussion.
I'll start telling stories. All right. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin ashrafil mursalin, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you to all for joining our webinar for today. So this is a webinar by PEDIX Center, IIUM, Peace Dialogue and Xenophobia Studies. It's also a collaboration with PASRU, Policy Area Studies Research Unit, and also stratc.com, which is a Southeast Asia-based portal on political, cultural affairs, and so on. So today we have a friend as a guest, yeah, on my side, Dr. Fawaz Abdul Aziz. We'll be talking about the tripartite cultural politics of halal at the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos. So I'll give a brief description of the topic and a brief bio of him. In this talk, Dr. Fawaz will consider the Philippine state-sponsored project for halal at the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, headquartered in Quezon City, Philippines, as a window to explore the larger historical project, the limits and conditions of possibility of the Philippine state and Filipino society to come to terms with Muslims in their midst. Yeah, we often talk about Muslims in Mindanao, but today I think we'll be talking more about Muslims in Luzon. So it will be something quite new, I think, for our understanding. As far as his bio is concerned, Fawaz studied political science, Islamic studies, and history for his bachelor's and master's degrees at the International Islamic University Malaysia. What degrees did you get, Fawaz? Trying
What
to
degree?
remember. Was it political science? And apart
Poli
from that?
science minor. Of course, we all had to minor in Islamic studies, kan?
Uh-huh.
And then master's was at ISTAC.
Oh, it was at
So
ISTAC. Oh, I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know. Okay.
And on something called Muslim World Issues. Don't ask me what it
Right.
means,
Yes. Yes.
but
All
I
right.
got a degree in it.
Okay. MashaAllah.
Okay.
And just to add to that, he went on after his master's at ISTAC to do a PhD in cultural social anthropology from the Friedrich Alexander University Erlangen, Nuremberg, Germany. He currently serves as analyst in the History and Regional Studies program of the Penang Institute in Georgetown. I'm very happy to receive him because we've been, I think, disconnected for a number of years. Yeah, we used to have many interesting conversations, as far as I remember, when we were both together part of the IIUM community. So today, Dr. Fawaz will speak about this topic for about 20, 25 minutes or so. Then hopefully we'll get to have a good discussion going on. So without further ado, Dr. Fawaz, the lens is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Daniel. Um, okay, let me share my screen. So as I said just now, you don't have to look at my face. You have something to look at while you hear me speak. Anyway, I'll share. Okay. Uh,
Yeah, it's coming out, I think.
okay.
The screen share symbol is coming out. So we're waiting for it to.
So can you see the cover, the title at least? I got the
Yeah,
date.
I
I
think
got the
so.
date
If you
wrong
can you do
because
the what's that, the
oh,
presentation one, so we can
okay,
see it
hold
fully.
slideshow. Is that all right?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So um so again, Dr. Daniel, thank you very much for having me, giving me this opportunity to present my research, what I've been working on for the past 7+ years since I began my PhD. I am a late bloomer, started late. Um, uh, so yeah, it's been a long project. And uh, again, the also the date is wrong. It's not 19 September, obviously. So just to kind of recap, I introduce, recap the introduction. I'm a graduate of IAUM in political science and in historical civilizational studies. In 2017, I received the opportunity to pursue my PhD in Germany as a member of a research project in the anthropology of bureaucratization. So more specifically, the project examined the bureaucratization or the state-led institutionalization of Islam and Muslim affairs in Southeast Asia. So that's the larger project, research project of this group. The project was funded by the German Research Foundation, and it was made up of four researchers. So I was one of them. One of my colleague, one of the researchers is a Romanian, and she studied the bureaucratization of Islam in Malaysia. Another is a Thai German who researched the bureaucratization of Islam in Indonesia. Um, and then our principal investigator is was Professor Dr. Dominic Muller, a
Oh,
German.
okay.
Yeah, you know him?
I don't know. I think he sounds familiar. I hope I haven't mistaken him for a football player. So,
Well, there are several Dominic Mullers actually. One football
yeah.
player, one senior, very senior Dominic Muller, also I think Islamic studies, and a very young
Yes.
Dominic Muller.
Yeah, there's a
And
Dominic Miller who's a guitarist as well as Sting's
yeah.
guitarist. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. I still listen to him, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, I don't know the guitars. So anyway, our principal investigator, who's also German, he examined the case of bureaucratization of Islam in Brunei and Singapore. And I was tasked to look at the bureaucratization of Islam in a Philippine context. So let me try to go to there's only 2 pages. So yeah, okay. So usually when people talk or hear about Islam and Muslims in relation to the Philippines, people usually think of Mindanao, as Dr. Daniel mentioned just now. Both academics and non-academics usually think of Mindanao. They associate Mindanao with Islam and Muslims, especially a particular region in Mindanao called the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. For those of you who are not so familiar, Philippines is made up of three major islands. Mindanao is the southern major island, and then there's Luzon, which is north, and that is where Manila is, and then there's the island or group of islands in the middle called the Visayas. So now it's understandable that most people associate Islam and Muslims in the Philippines to Mindanao because 65% of the Muslim population in the Philippines are in um, this a region of Muslim Mindanao. There's a total of 6.98 million Muslims in the Philippines. 65% of them are in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. But that means quite a large percentage, 35%, live outside of that autonomous region. And this 35%, or almost 2.5 million, they come under a different jurisdiction, not the regional government of the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. So this 2.5 million, the 35% who live outside of this autonomous region, they come under the central government of the Philippines. And the central government has, offices in Manila City as well as Quezon City. And these two cities are within the larger metropolitan Manila, what they call Metro Manila. So again, so the 35% who live outside of the autonomous region, they are under the Manila government. Now, it has to be remembered that the Muslim presence in the north has been there for a long time, since even before the Spaniards came. Muslims have ruled and lived in places like Intramuros and Tondo and Batangas in and around Manila from at least the 1500s, if not earlier. So, for example, Intramuros is the site of the old Manila. And it was a Malay Muslim sultanate before it was invaded and taken over by the Spanish, and it was renamed Fort Santiago. But very little attention has been paid either to the past or the present of these Muslim communities. Uh, Now, this 2.5 million Muslims are dispersed throughout the Philippines outside of the autonomous region. And like I said, they come under the administration of the central government. More particularly, they are represented and they are administered by a government agency in Manila that is today called the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos.
Mm-hmm.
That is the government department that I was doing my field work in for slightly over than a year when I was in the Philippines. 13 months doing my field work there. I was based in the office there. I received official permission to speak with the staff, and I was given permission to access the archives, and basically I mean, this is what anthropologists do. They just hang out. I was given official permission to hang out for 13 months. And typical of anthropological fieldwork, I carried out my research primarily as participant observer. So
Mm-hmm.
what did that mean? I went to NCMF every day as if it was, I was going to the office. I was given a desk. They were very gracious and very hospitable enough to give a desk for me to station myself. This might be one of the first times any anthropologist has gotten a desk inside a government department to do his or her study.
Yeah, I have
And
to ask you how this happened. Why was this the case, though?
yeah, I don't think it's my charm. I'm not that charming. But yeah, I mean, I think several factors. One is I was Muslim. I wasn't some foreign researcher who a lot of times are, suspected or not trusted. But because I was Muslim, because I was Malaysian, I think there is some kind of trust, or the fact that because I mean, I don't know. But yeah, I asked and I was able to charm myself into this government department.
And this
Uh,
was the Philippines under Duterte, huh?
this was slightly after. This is Aquino.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, now I forget. Yeah, slightly 1 year before Duterte came into power. It was
Okay.
still Aquino, and then so as participant observer, I was given a desk. I attended office meetings. I carried out structured and semi-structured interviews. I engaged in conversations and discussions in the office, outside the office, in the canteens. I met and socialized with NCMF staff during social and official events. I sometimes helped them with their work. Sometimes I did their work for them. I prepared PowerPoint presentations for them. I prepared talking points. I took minutes of meetings for them. I took notes. I gave my inputs when they asked. Um, and I was able to access some of the documents and archives.
Mhm.
I went through Ramadan with them. I did my daily Friday and Eid prayers with them, so on and so forth.
So there were Muslim staff on board.
Okay, so this National Commission on Muslim Filipinos is supposed to represent Muslims. So almost all of them are Muslims.
Okay.
And I will talk about this later, but uh, so Muslims in the Philippines are officially categorized into 13 ethno-linguistic groups. So there are 13, and then there are smaller groups that belong to the indigenous that have been Islamized also. most of my interlocutors, my how do you say, I don't like to call them my subjects, but the people that the staff who I engage with for my research, the majority belong to three they call tribes. Tribes is a very non in unpolitically correct, in incorrect political term. Uh, but basically 13 ethno-linguistic tribes. The majority, the biggest are the Maranaos, Mangindanaos, and the Tausuls. And then there are 10 other smaller tribes. Um, so okay, so that's the kind of like context. Now, because my group we were asked to study the bureaucratization of Islam, I took the particular topic of halal. So my object of study, there's an anthropologist, Clifford Geertz. He talked about object of study versus object of analysis. So my object of study, my general object of study, is how halal is being bureaucratized or institutionalized by the state. That was my research. It was an anthropological study of the micro project by the Philippine state to develop a system of regulations and governance for the halal industry.
Okay.
Okay, so that project began around, now it's 25 years ago. It began around 2000. Of course, halal has been around, halal practices have been around for a long time, but the Philippine state only came in officially around in the year 2000. Now, of course, what's interesting about this particular project of halal is that it's within the context of a Catholic majority state. It's formally secular, of course, but in shape, in color, and dynamics,
Right.
Philippines is distinguished by its Catholic character. The shape, color, and dynamics of Philippine governance and politics is really um, dominated by Catholicism. Now, so the question that I was faced with are two interrelated questions. One is, what happens to Islam um, when it goes through the process of Philippine bureaucracy and Filipino bureaucrats? And then the other question is, what happens to Philippine society, Philippine bureaucracy and bureaucrats when Islam comes into the picture or becomes bureaucratized? So it's kind of like looking, one, Islam and Muslim affairs going through the tunnel of the Philippine context, and the other is what happens to the Philippine context when Islam informs it or
Just to
shapes
intervene
it.
here a bit,
Yep, yep.
what was there a demand from the Muslim minority community for halal to be institutionalized and regulated that led to
Well,
this?
there is a demand, but whether the demand was how do you say, expressed for the
Mm,
state
mm,
to satisfy this demand is something else.
all
Of
right,
course, there were some who did want the state to do it, and then for various reasons, there are some who, um, of course, they want um, uh, uh, halal goods and services, but they don't want it. They don't want the government to be involved.
right,
So there are various reasons for this. Some is mistrust, some is an ideological. They don't, that government is the best, which governs least. A lot of American political, ideas affecting it. And plus, there is this paradox in the Philippines. So, or paradox about the Philippines that Patricio Abinales has talked about. He says. Um, the Philippines is obviously a weak state in many areas, many dimensions. So social welfare is in very bad shape. Of course, the economy is in bad shape. There's poverty, grinding poverty. There's social issues from drugs to, to violent crime, to all kinds of things. So they call it a weak state. But at the same time, there's always been a distrust of a government that's strong enough to handle these problems. And partly that has to do with the history of dictatorships, right?
mm,
So with Marcos was a strong man. Um, um, but with his strength, he often applied it in ways that were oppressive. I mean, thousands of people were, as you know, thousands of people were jailed and disappeared, killed. There was martial law for many years. So there's the weakness on the one hand, and then there's the distrust. So these are 2 points of the horn that Patricia Abinales talks about. So it's very difficult. Even when I was there, it's very difficult, even in a metropolis like Metro Manila with 14 million people and a lot of Muslims. It's still very difficult to get basic halal
mm,
supplies, just to get food, for example. So um, even unless you are in the Muslim enclaves. So in parts of Manila City, there'll be enclaves of Muslim settlements. Usually they congregate, they set up settlements around mosque. But unless when you leave that enclave and into outside of that enclave, it, it's very difficult to get food that is halal. So and so this is one of the questions, and this is one of the concerns of people when this halal project was started. There seems to be a lot of state support, or at least lip service, for halal, but it is essentially for the export industry.
mm,
So many people were saying that Muslims within Metro Manila themselves are in need of halal food, but it doesn't the you know this halal project does not seem to look to cater to them, but is obviously about making money in export markets. So that's one of the things that I heard many times. Um, okay, so now I'd like to take a step back, and I'd like to talk about three figures that I used to encounter on a almost daily, if not regular basis. Okay, so and these three figures are: one was a ghost, the ghost of one of Jesus Christ's apostles who appeared in the 9th century Spain. Okay, I regularly met him in Manila during my fieldwork. The second figure is a late 19th century, early 20th century Filipino statesman, also dead. Um, and the third is a journalist, also dead, passed away in 2006. So the journalist is relatively recent, but still he passed away more than 20 years ago. Now, these three figures I encountered on a regular basis, and they raised for me um, the foundational questions to my research. So if we go to the first figure in my so-called cover page there, you can see the name. First, you can see the title: a warrior saint, a statesman, and journalist. So the first figure that I want to talk about is Santiago Matamoros. He's a ghost. To English Catholics, he is known as Saint James, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ. In the Spanish-speaking world, Saint James is called Santiago.
mm,
Now, in a critical battle in the year 844 between the Spanish Crusaders and the Muslim army from Al-Andalus, remember the Muslims in Al-Andalus and North Africa at that time were called Moors.
mm,
Um, Now, in 844, just as the two armies were about to clash, the ghost of Santiago appeared to the Spanish king Ramiro. And this ghost was the one that inspired the Spanish monarch, Ramiro the First, to victory, inspired him to victory over the Muslim army from Cordoba. Now, since that battle, which is mythical, a battle that in fact never actually occurred, but
Okay.
Santiago has come to be called Santiago Matamoros, or Saint James the Moor Killer, the Moro Killer.
Mhm.
Now, Santiago has been invoked by Iberian soldiers and other crusaders for centuries, including in Malacca when the Portuguese attacked and took over Malacca. They invoked the Saint James or Santiago Matamoros. Now, the reason I encountered Santiago Matamoros is because every few months I would have to renew my visa at the Bureau of Immigration in the old part of Manila. Now, before I reach the immigration, I would always have to pass under the statue of Santiago Matamoros. Now, this statue is of Santiago sitting on a horse with a sword over his head, and the horse is trampling on four bearded, turbaned Muslims, obviously. So they're in the middle of a pitched battle. Now, it was interesting to me that of all the figures that they could enshrine in this as a statue at the entrance of Manila is this statue of Santiago Matamoros, Saint James the Moor Killer. And Santiago Matamoros is venerated as a patron saint in more than 6 cities throughout the Philippines. And this is
Mhm.
in addition to the global Catholic feast of Saint James on the 25th of July every year. It just passed a few months ago.
Mhm.
So that's the first figure. The second figure I want to talk about is somebody called Claro M. Recto, who was born in 1890 and died in 1960. Now he's one of the national icons. So he's one of the national icons. He was one of the negotiators for Philippine independence, a Supreme Court judge, a senator of the Philippine Congress, father of the 1935 Constitution. And throughout Manila, you can see statues of Claro Recto around the city. Uh, the central train station is named after him, highways and roads. He's an icon in the Philippine landscape of national heroes. He is he is celebrated as the best of Catholic Filipinos, the finest mind of his generation, a Renaissance man, a miracle lawyer, the greatest Filipino man of Spanish literature. He was noted for his fearless nationalism, his criticisms of corruption, his influence on modern Philippine political thought, and his quiet but consistent Catholic faith. But while he was the best of Catholic Filipinos, he spelled the worst for Muslims in the Philippines because he was an advocate of a strong centralist Philippine state, and he was one of two authors of what became the 1935 Colonization of Mindanao Act. So
Mhm.
he was the author of the law that promoted and intensified the settlement of Catholic Filipinos into Mindanao, and the law that also served to legalize the annexation of Muslim and indigenous lands, uh, giving it to Northerners. That's the second figure, Claro Recto. The third one and the last person that I'll be talking about is somebody called Maximo Soliven, Maximo V. Soliven, born in 1929 and passed away, like I said, about 20 years ago in 2006. He is celebrated as the doyen of patriotic Philippine journalism. He's considered to be the one of the idols of Philippine journalism. But just like Claro Recto, Sullivan, representing the best of Catholic Filipinos, he spelled the worst for Muslims in the Philippines because an extremely influential journalist, Sullivan portrayed Muslims as antithetical to Filipino. The Muslim is not just different from the Filipino, but opposite to Filipino-ness in terms of socio-political and cultural practices, traditions, institutions, and systems such as education, marriage, and gender relations.
Mhm.
Um, So, for example, he wrote of Muslims as being predominantly terrorists and liable to other criminal activities. Muslims, he says, he claimed, are not sedentary residents or inhabitants, so they have no claim to Philippine land. Now, Sullivan is okay. So, for example, in 2000, he wrote that the Muslims of Zamboanga and Sulu regions in southern Philippines, they are mostly seafaring folk. He said, let's call them pirates and raiders. They are neither
Mm.
farmers, planters, nor agriculturists. In 2004, I remember him writing this. He was against the establishment of a mosque in Manila, in a place called San Juan, because according to Sullivan and according to the property owners in San Juan, a mosque would attract terrorists, drug traffickers, and other criminal elements to the neighborhood and thereby lower the value of their property. Furthermore, a mosque was anachronistic to the Catholic character of the area. Now, before you think that that Sullivan was an exception or the extreme, actually many of his views are felt or expressed by many Filipinos, and this is confirmed in a nationwide survey that was carried out in 2005 of Filipino perceptions and attitudes towards Muslims. So the question that I ask, or that the question that was raised in my mind is all these three figures, Santiago, the Moor killer, Claro Recto, who legalized the settler colonization of Mindanao, and Max Sullivan, who wrote of Muslims as landless, itinerant, un-Filipino terrorists, pirates, drug traffickers, and criminals. Now, how does this milieu of national icons and heroes affect the project for Philippine Halal? You have such a milieu in an ideological environment that seems to be so antagonistic to something like the project for Halal. So that was among the first questions that was raised in my mind when I started my field work. So now I'm gonna go slightly into my field work now. If there are any questions or things anybody want to ask to clarify, or we can go on.
Okay, then we can go on for a bit.
Okay,
All right.
so that's the general context. Now, then I started my field work in end of 2017. And one of the first things that I realized, or one of the first things that I discovered, is that although the Halal project began 20 years ago, um, 20 years ago, and even after I had arrived, and by 2017, 2018, um, it has still not gotten off. It has still not gotten traction among either local Muslims or even foreign markets. Um, and I discovered that there's an array of challenges, complications, and issues that uh, prevented the project from developing or going very far. So the project, the Halal project, as I came to discover, there were many false starts, there were stops, there were many steps backwards, many tentative steps forward. The project would get unraveled. Somebody would the head would be changed, and then they would start all over again. I mean, in terms of starting a system of trying to create institutions, trying to start a system of certification and accreditation. So there's so many of these starts and stops and going forward and coming and stepping backwards. So I was interested in that. Why why did it why has it why has it taken so long and yet still not taken off? Whereas compared to, like, for example, Thailand, you have a minority um, Muslims are a minority there, but the halal industry is very strong. You have, of course, Singapore, Muslims being in the minority, and that, of course, it doesn't cannot compare with Indonesia and Malaysia. But in the Philippines, they usually they start, they're among the earliest to do things. So, like for example, Bank Islam actually started in 1973, 1972, very early, even compared to Muslim countries, and many other things. But with the Halal project, didn't seem to have gone very far despite 20 years having passed.
Mm,
So one of the things that I saw is, well, one of the reasons is that a lot of lip service and a lot of pledges and public expressions of support, um, have been made by government officials and politicians, but very little actual investment or injection of resources or capital. So this is the general situation for the 2 decades, 2000 to 2020. Now it has changed a little bit very recently, towards the end of my end of my field work and end of my research.
mm.
So my dissertation had to stop, and and it's about that period of time when the project was not taking off. Um, so basically, the Halal project at the NCMF, National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, and the other government departments, the Halal project was on a shoestring budget.
Mm.
Um, so one of the senior NCMF officials told me, basically the Halal unit at the NCMF consisted of a table, a typewriter, and a secretary. So those three things made up the Halal unit. Despite everything they say about, we will conquer the halal economy. Philippines, we have the resources and ingenuity. But yeah, basically it was a shoestring budget for two decades. So no, basically only operational expenditure. They paid for some staff and electricity and water, but no capital expenditure, nothing to develop the research or human resources or training, so on and so forth.
Was there a consultancy council incorporating, Muslim experts, professionals, and all that to help?
Yes, the institutional predecessor to NCMF is called the Office on Muslim Affairs, OMA. So when they, so this Halal project actually started with them in the year 2000. And one of the things that they did was have a council of elders, and advisors for the Halal project. And these are the community leaders and some ustas and some ulama. But for a number of reasons we can talk about later, the project at Oma collapsed after 2 years. It was actually very active in the first 2 years, and then it collapsed. And partly because the project was challenged on constitutional grounds. People said that Philippines being a secular state cannot be the government cannot be part of something religious such as halal. So he went to court, and then
Mm.
basically they said the government cannot be involved in halal. So anyway, that was the reason why the project collapsed at Oma, but it restarted in other ways after those 2 years. Yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, there was a council, but then that council kind of like faded into the background and never revived after that. Now some people might say maybe it's just not enough money to invest in, but so the thing that I've often asked is like, there seems to be no money, but then there's money in order to organize a 1 day, 2 day conference and expensive hotel. And so those 2 days would cost millions of pesos. So
Mm.
like say 400, 500 pesos is about um no 4 to 5 million pesos of 400, 500,000 ringgit. So that money would be spent on 1 or 2 days, but not for infrastructure, not for materials, not for human resources, not for development. Um, okay, the second thing that I found is that okay, so remember I was saying that governance of Muslims fall under two separate structures. There's a Mindanao regional government, and then there's the government based in Manila.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what so you see the Muslims are governed still under such a framework of security and conflict
Right.
that
Yes.
in even in the Halal project and the how do you say the national government agency in Manila, decisions are being made by the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the peace process. So the top official in charge of peace, security, and conflict in Mindanao is the one who's calling the shots for even like salaries and budgets and appointees of the Muslim government agencies in Manila.
Mm.
So that's the second thing that I thought was uh, how do you say revealing about the nature of Muslim governance in Philippines. Um, let me see. Okay, the third thing is that even though there wasn't any investment in the Halal project, a competition did build up between, okay, there's at two different levels. A competition between individuals to be the head of the Halal project, and on the other hand, competition between government agencies to lead and to coordinate the Halal project. So for this reason, leadership and coordination of Halal went from, the Office on Muslim Affairs, and then it went to the Department of Trade and Industry, and then it went to the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, and then sometimes it was championed and sometimes it was shared, sometimes it was fought over by different departments. So Department of Trade and Industry, and then Department of Agriculture, and then Department of Health, Department of Tourism, Department of Science and Technology. All of these, sometimes they championed halal, sometimes they fought over it, sometimes they shared different aspects of the. So that's the third thing that I found, this competition for halal. Related to this is um okay, so related to this is the point that obviously because there's a lot of the halal industry potentially very lucrative. I mean, people keep talking about, the $1 trillion halal economy. If only we can tap into the global halal market. So so a lot of individuals and a lot of government agencies would fight in order to become the gatekeeper. As what's his name? Mahmoud Mamdani, the father of the New York mayor.
Right.
He has a book called Define and Rule. When you are able to define things, you're able to rule
Mm.
the matter. So yeah, so a lot of agencies and a lot of individuals wanted to be the gatekeepers to the halal project. But what this meant was eventually um, the Muslim government agencies were displaced as the lead and coordinating agency for halal, and they were replaced by government agencies that are not known to represent Muslims or Muslim interests. So, for example, like I mentioned earlier, Department of Trade and Industry and Department of Agriculture. And it's not just government agencies. Of course, companies, non-Muslim companies, were also getting into the act or jumping on the bandwagon. So today, one of the largest halal companies in the Philippines is San Miguel. San Miguel, the beer and gin maker,
Mm.
they have one of the largest companies producing halal products under their subsidiary called Pure Foods. Um, the fourth thing, and it's related to what I just talked about, the fourth thing is that as Muslims began to be displaced and replaced from the halal project, um, the ulama,
Mm.
who traditionally provided legitimacy and credibility to halal, they came to be sidelined and edged out of the Halal project. They came to be, yeah, they came to be sidelined out of the project as a whole. Um, so this is I follow the approach or the school of Talal Asad when he talks about secularization. Secularization being the political and social displacement and replacement of uh, for lack of a better word, for traditional norms, relations, and institutions. So in the case of Halal Project, the secularization project and process of marginalizing the ulama as a political and social institution. So this has happened throughout history and in Muslim countries, of course, as the replacement of the Islamic judiciary, there's the Sharia courts with European courts that look into dispute and stuff like that. So before I end this section, I just want to talk about one funny incident when I was there. Because as I said, the ulama are marginalized, sidelined from the Halal project, especially the certification and accreditation of Halal. They're not part of it, or they're a very small ceremonial part of it. So the Department of Trade and Industry, which is the equivalent of MITI, our Ministry of International Trade and Industry, the DTI, Department of Trade and Industry Philippines, they went on a roadshow. They led an official delegation to different countries and different regions with large Muslim markets to promote Philippine halal. So one of the places that they went to was Indonesia, but they were surprised because when they met with the Majlis Ulama Indonesia (MUI), the Scholars Council of Indonesia, the MUI told the Philippine delegation, we cannot accept Philippine halal because we do not see the presence or representation of Philippine ulama in your certification and accreditation system,
Mm.
right? So what did the Philippine delegation do? When they got back to Manila, they organized very quickly an assembly of ustas and asatida, and then they had them gather and they had a conference so that they could have an event where they endorsed the halal project, and they made a big publicity event of that endorsement. Very quickly, it was very quickly organized. But of course, I mean, how do you say, it becomes very obvious what they're trying to do, and it did not reverse or redress the issue of the ulama being marginalized from the project, Halal project.
Yeah.
So, but to be fair, and with regards to secularization, it's not something that is confined only to non-Muslim Filipinos, because even within NCMF, it was very obvious that the ulama, the ustaz, were only involved in the NCMF in ceremonial and
Mm.
ritual matters.
Mm.
So the recitation of du'as at the beginning and end of events, the Hajj, the Quran reading ceremonies, these are basically what the ustaz are involved in NCMF. So the project and process of secularization is not just with non-Muslims, but Muslims themselves are grappling with this. So I have two more sections, but again, I'd like to ask if there are the next section I want to talk about is more like conceptual. But if there are any questions before I go on to these concepts, I can address them now, or I can go on.
Okay, go ahead. Anybody just raise your hand or unmute your microphone.
Um, I have a question. What is the halal situation, right? I'm sorry if you already said this because I came a little late. But what is the halal situation now in the Philippines? I mean, is there an industry?
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, very briefly, that I looked at so my study was a historical anthropology of the Halal project from 2000 until about 2020. So much of what I'm saying pertains to that period of time. But so we're talking about the Halal project being in the doldrums, being moribund, stalemate and not moving. But beginning about 2019, 2020, things did begin to happen, and there was some movement um, and development. So they've gotten their act together in many ways compared to the previous 2 decades. It's become more formalized. There is some resources and investments put into the agencies in charge of developing the halal system. Um, and yes, I think the certificates are getting more credibility, and they're even uh, they've tabled a bill about 2 months ago to punish the use of fake halal logos and fake halal certificates. I don't think that has passed yet, but the fact that it has been tabled and submitted to Congress, I think, is an indication that things are moving forward. That's in Manila. In some other places, like for example, Duterte's Davao City, they actually have something called the Halal Ordinance, where these things like you know you can be fined for having a halal logo that is not legitimate or that's counterfeit. That's already been in place for several years now. Um, so yeah, to make the long story short, it's developed quite a lot over the past few years.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions before we go to the next section?
Well, just if I may, one more question.
No problem, no problem.
So if people are not that certain about being able to get halal food, are they growing, I mean, are they raising their own meat and slaughtering it themselves, if they can't be very sure?
Yeah, so I mean obviously like halal is a practice that's been I mean it's been practiced for hundreds of years in the Philippines and including in Manila. And what they used to do before the formalization of it is if they wanted to make sure that it's halal, then it's they would know that it's the butcher who does it. They would know
Yeah.
who the
Right.
butcher is, and so it was but with with developments in the economy and modernization and expansion of the economy, the products and services that you consume are you can't really see how it's produced. And so people have begun to think about how they can be sure, how it can be certified without necessarily seeing it. So those who there are people who don't believe in the certificates up until today. They don't trust. And so they just go to their neighborhood butcher. And as I said, Muslims usually live in enclaves or in settlements, and so they have their local butcher, their local market where you have Muslims setting up these services and offering these products. So that's still happening.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, maybe you can go to the next section for us.
Okay, so the next section I want to talk about is just some concepts, some conceptual remarks that I want to make about my research. Number one is I've talked about the Halal project, and the Halal project in my dissertation is actually, I mean, I categorize it as a micro project as opposed to a macro project. Now, what do I mean by micro project? I mean a project of the government that addresses or seeks to tackle a specific problem. Or a specific issue. So for example, so halal is one. And then there is the Philippine Amana Islamic Bank that was from 1972, 1973 during the time of Marcos Sr. Um, and then you had the Code of Muslim Personal Laws and the Sharia system that was also introduced during Marcos's time in order to so-called, apply Islamic laws to family and personal matters. So this is what I refer to as micro projects. Um, and for reasons that I will go to soon, these micro projects have suffered from some of the same problems. Another micro project another micro project is the government departments that have been created and set up to administer and represent Muslims. So NCMF is an example of a micro project. The institutional predecessor of NCMF, which is the Office on Muslim Affairs, which I mentioned earlier, is also considered a micro project. You have the early 1900s, the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes, the Office of the Commissioner for Islamic Affairs, OSIA. All of these I consider to be micro projects because they're specific, and so far they have not lasted very long. They, just like the Halal project, sometimes they would create it and then it would be dismantled and then they would recreate it again. So you have the Bureau of Non-Christian Tribes, you have the OSIA, and then you have the OMA, and then you have National Commission on Muslim Filipinos. So this is what I mean by micro projects. Now, macro project. So my thesis, I'm coming to my thesis soon, or my argument soon. In contrast to the micro project, I talk about in my dissertation the macro project. And what I mean by that is the long-standing project of Philippine state and society to come to terms with the Muslims in their midst, or with Muslims as a physical demographic reality. So this is a macro project, which, for obvious reasons, is something that goes back 500 years.
Mhm.
But it has taken different shapes and forms. So, for example, in the 1500s up until 1900, you have the Spanish project for the Muslim, which is basically become Christian or die. That was a project. So it was a political, military, and religious policy of recognizing only Christians as citizens and subjects of the Spanish crown. The way they came to terms with the Muslims is accept Jesus Christ or die. 1500s to 1899. The second the second form of this macro project is when the Americans came in. This is the secular American colonial period, 1899 until 1946. So during the American colonial period, they allowed some Muslim religious and social practices, for example, Hajj and the schools, as long as the Muslims did not challenge or conflict with the American order and dominance. Okay, so this is what might be loosely called the secular period. The earlier one that I talked about was the so-called religious period, then the secular period, and then 1940s to about the 2000. This is what I would categorized as the project for mechanical integration of Muslims. So this is when they wanted to integrate Muslims into the political body of Filipinos, but uh, they would only accept them if they became social cultural Filipinos. Now, what I mean by that, Thomas McKenna has talked about this. They would only give Muslims their rights, say for example, the right to access hospital treatment or social welfare. They would only uh, uh, provide for these rights uh, if the Muslim would attain the education of the Catholic Filipino. So what I mean by this is none of these other things like social welfare and roads and hospitals and schools were provided to the Muslims. Because to those in power, the priority was to educate the Muslims to become like Filipinos. So a lot of scholarships were given to Muslims, but that's it. So you have the National Commission on Integration, But the only thing that the NCI did was provide scholarships. So in other words, the message was, you will qualify for the rights and privileges of citizenship once you attain the educational status of Catholic Filipinos. So
To
that's
to
what
what
yeah, sorry.
to what extent did the political situation in the South contributed to this
Well,
imagination of in the
yeah,
North?
well, okay, so it's kind of like, okay, so what happened after World War II, when the Japanese left, um, much of Mindanao was really in bad shape. But because Manila saw Mindanao as a remote world that did not belong to them culturally. They only saw Mindanao as a juridical and legal entity. It's
Mhm.
it's it's a land. And what's interesting is they saw it as a land without people, just like some countries, land without people for people without land. Um, um, so it was in bad shape, and then because, for example, there were no roads; these had been
There were
destroyed.
attempts at transmigration, right, to bring those from the North to the South.
Yes, yeah. So that's the thing. These development projects were confined to those settlements where the majority were Christian,
Mhm.
the northern migrants. And so the Muslim settlements and Muslim areas were allowed to kind of deteriorate, and a lot of social problems because of those deteriorations. So they call them banditry. And there were a lot of rebellions and unrest and insurgencies, and so for example, the law was on the side of the northern migrants into Mindanao, the Christian Filipinos. And so when a Christian takes over land, for example, um, the law and the courts would be in favor of the Christians rather than the Muslims, even though Muslim families had been staying there for decades or centuries. So this is one of the examples and situation in which it just got worse and worse until they had to have a commission. And it's interesting that they called it the moral problem. And what happened was, and this is a reflection of what I'm talking about, this mechanical integration. They had an investigation, and then they had a commission, and then the commission came out with a report. And the report said, the problems that we find in Mindanao is because of the lack of education and of the Muslims. And
Mm.
it's because of their traditional and feudal and backward thinking that they are so inimical to modern amenities such as health, such as hygiene, such as, so on and so forth. So that was the reason why after this commission, they set up the National Commission on Integration, and the main focus of this National Commission on Integration is scholarships rather
Mm.
than, as I said, hospitals and roads and, stuff like that.
Now,
S-
it is 4:10 at the moment, so I want you to touch a bit on your final segment
All right.
before we conclude and before we take final questions.
Okay. Before I go into this final, I just want to mention that um, starting from the 2000s, I feel that there's been a shift in the macro projects that I've been talking about, where
Mm.
they're really trying, are finally recognizing that perhaps we need to recognize Muslims with their cultural identity rather than forcing them to become Filipinos. So there seems to be this effort. Okay, so going back to my last part, which is my argument. So in order to kind of to understand and to explain the problems with the Halal project and why it's taken so long, it hasn't taken off until recently. I argue that there's a tripartite of cultural politics that affects the micro project and the macro project. You can't solve, or you cannot address the micro or the macro without addressing this tripartite of cultural politics. Now, what I mean by tripartite is um, I imagine like, the DNA, the what's it called? The triple helix
Mm.
um, way of thinking towards Muslims. And what I argue is that there are three strands making up this tripartite of cultural politics. The first strand is, I think people can understand this quite quickly. The first strand is this ambivalence and conflict and tension and contestation over what Muslim means and the implications of Muslim to Filipino-ness
Mm.
and Philippine national identity. Because most Filipinos, most Catholic and Christian Filipinos, they cannot imagine, they they cannot associate being Filipino with being Muslim. you know so I mean, it's just so ingrained in the idea of Filipino-ness that you are Christian or you're Catholic. And for so long, for social due to the socialization and educational policies, the Muslim has been seen as so antithetical and so oppositional and so different from the idea of Filipino. So I remember even my father-in-law, I mean, as late as my father-in-law's generation, my father-in-law, um, uh, uh, Christians would tell him we thought that Muslims have tails on their back. And there's so many things about the Muslims, basic things that seem incredulous, but because for so long they've thought of the Muslim as being the other. You cannot associate. I mean, it's just like maybe like in Malaysia, it's difficult to think of a Malay being non-Muslim. So I mean, even
Right.
personally, when I went to Bali, it was jarring for me to see an Indonesian praying at a shrine.
Mm.
So anyway, so that's one strand of this tripartite. The second strand is um, I've talked about secularization as a process, as a political project and process, and basically a process and project of displacing, values and relations and institutions, replacing them with secular values, instrumentalist values, um, and secular institutions and values and relations. I think that's readily understandable. You might not agree with it, but understandable. And
Mm.
the third strand is okay, this is a bit difficult to argue, but something that I call the Catholicity of the Filipino.
Mhm.
Now, Catholicity with a small c, not not big C as in Catholic, Catholicity. And the reason for this is even Muslims as well as indigenous groups who are non-Catholics, for hundreds of years, um, they've been socialized and educated by the church, and they've been socialized by the colonial powers. And one of the outcomes of this is a way of thinking that sees the Catholic as the norm, as a
Mm.
good, and anything other than the Catholic is abnormal and not good and the other. So like I said, this kind of thinking, this binary thinking affects as well Muslims as well as indigenous. So
Right.
for example, even they would talk about the Muslims as being corrupt. Muslims talking about Muslim government agencies as being corrupt, as being inefficient, as being full of as being nepotistic. as being, crime filled, you know, but the thing is, in a country like Philippines, where corruption and nepotism and drugs and violence is in your face every day, the minute you
Mm.
step out the door,
Yeah.
but they see the Muslim as representing all of these social ills.
Yes.
So the question is like, so what they're saying is, if you take the Muslims out of the equation, Philippines and government would be not corrupt. There'd be no nepotism. There'd be no, all of it'd be super efficient, which of course, you know, is, you know, not true. So finally, so my argument is that this tripartite of cultural politics of Catholicity, ambivalence and conflict over Muslim and secularization, this makes up the tripartite cultural politics that affect micro projects and macro projects in the Philippines. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
very much
you
for your
very
patience.
much, Dr. Fawad. I think it was very engaging. I learned a lot personally from this, and yeah, it's done in a very, I think, casual way, and there's a lot of interventions as well that didn't derail you from your discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for the patience.
Yeah, I think we can maybe allow one final question or comment or two if you like. Anybody, feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
So what you're describing is a lot from the past, is that right? And currently, the situation isn't quite as severe as the way you're describing it.
Um, I would say that there are improvements and some advances here and there,
Mm,
but the larger picture and the larger problem is is still there. I mean, and they're very obvious when you know when when you go there, when you're there. So even recently, you can still, I mean, I if I go with my wife to the supermarket in Manila, I'll have the security guard following us from behind, you know. Um, my wife was stopped from going into the university campus that I was affiliated with and told to wait outside before she enters. And she had to wait for like an hour. Whereas people who are obviously Filipino, and she's wearing hijab. So she's obviously Muslim. Whereas those who are obviously not Muslim, they would just be filing in and walking in. And then you have politicians who talk about, again, Muslims being so uneducated they cannot even make pandesal or the bread. You have media reports still. I mean, like for example, when I was there, they talked about an explosion, and then they had a picture of a suspect, and then the caption by the police said "Muslim looking suspect."
Oh,
So there's a lot
come
of
on.
and then what else? There's just so some and and despite some progress in the halal project, it's still very difficult to get halal food and other services. Okay, and one last thing that I forgot to talk about. You see this picture of the Muslims as being confined to Mindanao and not being regarded as Filipino, right? In 1977 and early 1980s, when Marcos set up the Sharia system and the Code of Muslim Personal Laws, that led to the creation of Sharia courts in 5 provinces in Mindanao.
mm,
But up until today, 77, now it's how many years? 52 years.
yeah.
There's no Sharia
Okay.
courts in the north, in Manila. The problem with this is that you have many Muslim women who are in Manila, for example, but they cannot get a divorce from the husband who beats her unless she goes all the way to Mindanao and get a certificate from the Sharia court there.
Oh,
So there's
wow.
a lot of cases of abuse, of violence, and women who want to be freed from the husband, but they cannot because there's Sharia courts, and until recently they don't want to set up a Sharia court in Manila. So
Just
like
to be clear, there's two types of marriages in the Philippines: Catholic and Muslim, or Islamic.
yes,
There's no civil marriage, right?
uh no, there's civil marriage and then there's Muslim. So civil marriage, according to the civil laws, one of the differences is that you can't marry a second or
Okay. Yeah.
another wife. But with Muslims, there is that leeway. I mean
Mhm.
that license. I don't know what you call it.
You just call
Um,
it license.
yeah, but so it's a hassle, and they're only now taking steps to set up Sharia courts, but still they haven't been set up. So
Mm.
it leads to a lot of abuse, but it's because of this mentality that Muslims belong to Mindanao. They're not Filipinos. You notice that in Mindanao, you have the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. You have a lot of things called Bangsamoro. But in the north, like in Manila, it's the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos. It's not Moro. So there is that legacy of, like, Moros is a political concept, and Muslims is something that is not political, but they're
But
still
internally,
struggling.
Fawaz, internally, do the Muslims in the north themselves distinguish from the south?
Well, it's kind of impossible because
Mm.
relatives are there. They still have family
Okay.
there, and so actually, and somebody actually got angry at me when I said, when I tried to when I asked about this, is NCMF a project for the Muslim Filipino? I mean, a project to develop the identity of Muslim
I
Filipinos.
see. Mm.
And I think it is, but that person got angry at me and says, "Why are you trying to divide between us and Muslims in Mindanao? We
Mhm.
are, why are you trying to differentiate between us?" I'm not, but what I'm saying is it's still a struggle for Filipinos to recognize Muslims as a part of the Filipino identity, national identity.
Right. Okay, thank you. I think we have to respect the time, but again, I would like to
Um,
extend our
thank
thanks
you.
to Dr. Fawaz
Thank
for
you very
agreeing
much
to
for
do
having me.
this. So we enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed it personally very much. So I hope that we may be able to find something to collaborate on later on.
Yeah.
So
Thank
we'll
you very much for
definitely
having
follow our
me.
discussion.
Thank you for being very patient and very good audience. Not
Okay, thank